पाकिस्तान के खिलाफ बहुत सारे महाज खुले, कुछ हमने खुद खोले, काफी सारे हमारे खिलाफ खोले गए। आज के महाज इंडिया और इजराइल के नाम। इंडिया और इजराइल, जब इन दो ममालिक का नाम लिया जाता है तो पाकिस्तान में सबके कान खड़े हो जाते हैं। इंडिया के लिए रीजंस वाजे हैं। पार्टीशन से लेकर आज तक, बल्कि कल और परसों तक जब पाकिस्तान और इंडिया की क्रिकेट टीम्स वर्ल्ड कप के मैदान में उतरेंगी तो हमारी 76 साल जो राइवलरी है, हॉस्टिलिटी है, दुश्मनी है, वो वाजे होगी। क्रिकेट से लेकर न्यूक्लियर वेपन्स तक पाकिस्तान और इंडिया की जो रिलेशनशिप है, दुनिया की पुरानी तरीन, पिछली सदी की पुरानी तरीन दुश्मनियों में, राइवलरीज में मशहूर है। मगर इजराइल के साथ पाकिस्तान का जो एक और तारीखी मसला है, इवन दो इन दोनों की जो रूट्स हैं वो सिमिलर हैं, दोनों एक वक्त में बने, दोनों अकॉर्डिंग टू एक्सपर्ट्स, अकॉर्डिंग टू हिस्ट्री, दोनों रिलीजन, मजहबी बेसिस पे बने। अब पाकिस्तान कैसे बना, इजराइल कैसे बना, बिल्कुल अलग डिबेट है। कुछ लोग कहते हैं कि ये पैरेलल्स हैं दोनों में, मगर फिर भी इजराइल के साथ पाकिस्तान की जो रिलेशनशिप है डिप्लोमेटिकली, तारीखी तौर पे टेंस है। मगर हम इन दोनों की रिलेशनशिप को कैसे देखते हैं? आज का महाज, हाल ही में जो जंग 5 दिन हो गए अब छिड़ गई है, इन पिछले 5 दिनों में हिंदुस्तान ने क्या क्या बातें की हैं, क्या क्या मूव्स किए हैं, जिनको देख के पाकिस्तान को एक तो होशियार होना चाहिए, समझ आना चाहिए कि इंडिया और इजराइल, पाकिस्तान के ये दो हरीफ जो हैं, ये कैसे कोऑर्डिनेट कर रहे हैं। अब ये जो 5 दिन हो गए, इनमें कम से कम 2 ट्वीट्स की हैं इंडिया के वजीर आजम नरेंद्र मोदी ने, और उन्होंने क्लियरली वाज़े तौर पे बता दिया है कि बॉस, मैं इजराइल के साथ हूं। अब दिल्ली का जो रिलेशनशिप है, हम सबको पता है कि पिछले सालों में बहुत ये क्लोज हो गए हैं। नेतन्याहू की हुकूमत से पहले भी मोदी साहब जो हैं वो पहले इजरायली उन्होंने टूर की और पहले हिंदुस्तानी हेड ऑफ गवर्नमेंट बने जिनका उधर टूर हुआ। मगर बॉटम लाइन ये है कि कोल्ड वॉर के ज़माने में जब सर्द जंग थी तो इंडिया प्रो पैलेस्टीनियन था, मगर कोल्ड वॉर के बाद 90s में और फिर 2000 की और 2010 की दहाइयों में इंडिया और इजराइल बहुत करीब हुए हैं। इजराइल ने इंडिया को, कारगिल की जब जंग लड़ी थी तो इजराइल ने इंडिया को उन दिनों में वेपन्स देना पाकिस्तान के खिलाफ यूज करने के लिए शुरू कर दिए थे। 2001-2 की एस्केलेशन में जब दोनों फौजें आईबॉल टू आईबॉल बॉर्डर पे खड़ी हो गई थी तो इजरायली एडवाइजर्स, इजरायली टैंक कमांडर्स आ गए थे लाइन ऑफ कंट्रोल के उस तरफ। आज इंडिया और इजराइल की जो प्रॉक्सिमिटी है, जो दोस्ती है, उसमें टेक्निकल, उसमें वेपन्स, उसमें डिफेंस, उसमें इवन इंडस्ट्रियल और आईटी वगैरह की बहुत इन दोनों में लेन देन है। अब ये तो तारीखी और करंट अफेयर्स का मामला है, मगर ये जो जंग छिड़ गई है, इस सब में इंडिया आगे कैसे लेके चलेगा अपनी रिलेशनशिप इजराइल के साथ? अब याद रहे कि इजराइल जो है वो तो काफी अनइक्विवोकली क्लियर है फलस्तीनियों के बारे में, मगर इंडिया 2 स्टेट सोल्यूशन जैसे पाकिस्तान कहता है, जैसे और बहुत सारे ममालिक कहते हैं, वैसे इंडिया भी 2 स्टेट सोल्यूशन चाहता है। मगर इंडिया का एक और मसला है, इंडिया के रीजनल बहुत स्टेक्स हैं। इंडिया की दोस्तियां हैं कुछ ऐसे ममालिक के साथ जो इस वक्त इस कॉन्फ्लिक्ट को, इस जंग को ज्यादा शौक से नहीं देख रहे। इंडिया की दोस्ती है यूनाइटेड अरब एमिरेट्स के साथ, जिसका एक मुआहदा हुआ है, इब्राहिम अकॉर्ड्स जो हुए हैं यूएई और इजराइल के। इंडिया की दोस्ती बढ़ती जा रही है सऊदी अरब के साथ, जिसका मुआहदा होने वाला था, मगर अब नहीं लग रहा कि अनकरीब मुआहदा होगा। मगर फिर भी इंडिया के जो वेस्टेड इंटरेस्ट्स हैं मशरिक़ वस्ता में, वो इजराइल के साथ तो हैं ही हैं, मगर बाकी जो अरब और मुसलमान ममालिक हैं, मिसाली तौर पे इजिप्ट, मिस्र के साथ भी इंडिया की डील्स हैं। अगर ये जंग बढ़ती है, अगर ये अलग अलग ममालिक इजराइल पे दबाव डालते हैं किसी भी किस्म का, तो इंडिया कैसे बैलेंस करेगा? इंडिया कैसे सप्लाई करेगा इन सबको? इंडिया कैसे अपने आप को इस खिते में इन्फ्लुएंशियल रखेगा? क्योंकि याद रहे कि इंडिया बहुत बहुत ज्यादा पिछले 10-15 सालों में दोनों इजराइल और अरब ममालिक के साथ इंडिया की बहुत ज्यादा इन्फ्लुएंस बढ़ गई है। साथ साथ बेंजामिन नेतन्याहू और नरेंद्र मोदी का कंपैरिजन भी होता है। दोनों को स्ट्रॉन्ग मैन डेमोक्रेट्स कहा जाता है। दोनों दहशतगर्दी के खिलाफ बहुत तुले हुए हैं। दोनों की जीरो टॉलरेंस पॉलिसी है इस्लामिस्ट दहशतगर्दों के खिलाफ। मगर क्या ये जो दोनों की सिमिलैरिटीज हैं, क्या इन दोनों को जंग में, ये जंग जो है ये अलाउ करेगी या नहीं? साथ साथ पाकिस्तान क्या करेगा, बांग्लादेश क्या करेगा, साउथ एशिया में और भी मुसलमान ममालिक हैं जो इंडिया से जिनका राब्ता रहता है, अफगानिस्तान क्या करेगा, कुछ साउथ एशिया के जो टट्टू पिट्ठू मुल्क हैं जैसे बेचारे नेपाली हो गए वगैरह, वो तो क्लियरली इंडिया के स्फेयर ऑफ इन्फ्लुएंस में हैं, मगर कुछ मुल्क नहीं हैं। इस सब में जो बड़ा सवाल बनता है कि खुद इंडिया जिसमें 200 मिलियन से ज्यादा मुसलमान हैं, वो कैसा स्टैंड लेगा इस पूरी जंग में? ये आज का महाज है। एक इंटरेस्टिंग टॉपिक इसलिए है क्योंकि आज या कल ये जंग जब भी चले, जब तक चले, इजराइल इंडिया का सबसे बड़े वेपन सप्लायर्स की फहरिस्त में उसका मेंबर रहेगा। इजरायली जहाज, इजरायली टेक्नोलॉजी, इजरायली वेपनरी, इजरायली सर्वेलेंस इक्विपमेंट, इजरायली आर्मामेंट्स, इजरायली म्यूनिशंस आज इंडिया की फौज में, इंडिया की अफवाज में भरे हुए हैं। तो सवाल बनता है कि क्या अगले चंद दिनों में जैसे ये जंग आगे चलती है, हिंदुस्तान बमुकाबला पाकिस्तान कुछ फर्क पड़ता है या नहीं पड़ता? ये आज का महाज है। मैंने इन कुछ सवालों के लिए एक एक्सपर्ट लाइन अप किया हुआ है। अभी अभी वो इस खित्ते से वापस आए हैं। मेरा साथ दें, मेरा इंटरव्यू सुने। वॉशिंगटन से आज सुबह मैंने उनका खास इंटरव्यू किया। शेयर करें, लाइक करें, सब्सक्राइब करें, कमेंट करें। ओके, सो अब ये जो बड़े 3-4 सवाल हैं साउथ एशिया और स्पेशली इंडिया के बारे में, ये मैं अकेला तो नहीं दरियाफ्त कर सकता। मुझे मदद है with the one and only but never lonely Michael Kugelman, the director of the South Asia Center at the South Asia Institute at the Wilson Center. Good morning, my friend. How are you?
I'm very well, thanks. How are you?
Good. Welcome back to these great United States. You were in the Islamic Republic of Pakistan recently. How was that?
Great. I mean, despite the grim circumstances there, great trip, great conversations, great food, but of course, the politics and the economics and other aspects of Pakistan these days are not very good. But it was a great trip. Thanks for asking.
All right, good. Well, we have to do a separate follow-up show on your experience there, Mike. But let's keep it focused on the Israel-India access. Explain it to me like I'm a 5-year-old, which I sometimes tend to be. As far as these topics are concerned, how are these countries so close? What's really happening?
Well, I mean, we've seen India and Israel really strengthen their relationship over the last nearly decade. And I should say during the Modi era, we've seen trade relations pick up in a big way. Arms sales have really picked up. And at this point in time, Israel is a top supplier of Indian arms right now. And I would argue that the geopolitics are also lining up in a way that benefits and strengthens India-Israel relations. The Abraham Accords have, as you know, have normalized, have allowed Israel to normalize relations with a number of its Arab neighbors. That's created new opportunities for multilateral cooperation between Israel and a number of its Arab neighbors, of which India is a part of, such as initiatives like the I2U2 initiative. And if you look at India's relationships across the Middle East beyond Israel, some of its best, strongest relationships are with countries that have formal relations with Israel, Egypt, the UAE, and so on. And I would argue also, just looking at the personalities at play, Modi and Netanyahu, there are a number of similarities, particularly in terms of how they look at the issue of terrorism, and they've apparently got some very good chemistry. That's helped strengthen this relationship as well.
Right. So they're getting closer, plus they have some common friends. But you do mention that in your foreign policy brief, you do mention that India still seems to will have to strike a balancing act, that its relationships with certain countries in the Middle East wouldn't want those relationships to be compromised. If it gets too comfy, too close to Israel, too partisan in this war, which countries are those, and why would India be watching its back with those countries?
Well, I mean, first there's the issue of the Palestinians themselves. I mean, even as India's relationship with Israel has really strengthened over the last few years, its relations with the Palestinians continue to be strong. I'm not talking about Hamas. India has never backed Hamas or had any type of relationship with Hamas. But I'm talking about the Palestinian Authority and the Palestinian people themselves. I mean, India continues to support the Palestinian cause. Two-state solution. India has continued to provide aid, humanitarian assistance to Palestinian refugees. And it has even voted against Israel on a number of UN General Assembly resolutions. So it continues to show its support for the Palestinians. But indeed, getting to your point, what's especially important for India right now is that we mentioned these key regional players: Egypt, Saudi Arabia, UAE. These are very important relationships for India, but these are countries that, even if several of them have formal relations with Israel, they are appalled by the Israeli retaliation. I mean, the brutal nature of the Israeli retaliation to the Hamas attacks on Israel. And I think India wants to be very careful not to appear to be openly taking Israel's side in this war, even though it likely does privately, just because it wouldn't want to antagonize those key Arab partners.
Right. I mean, it's not just private, though, right? I mean, Prime Minister Modi was quite clear hours after the attack. He was quite unequivocally clear that we are with Israel. He used those words as far as I remember. But coming back in terms of aid, now we do know that Israel is has a growing importance in terms of its as a weapons partner for India. And India is the largest net weapons importer in the world, not just in the region, for the last decade and more. We all know this. But we sometimes don't sort of really talk about India's own economic and military might. I know India doesn't export a lot of weapons, but could it aid Israel in the coming days? We've seen smaller militaries like the Iranian military aid the Russians in Ukraine. Can we see that happening in a way, a less equipped military? I wouldn't say India is less equipped than Israel, but in terms of certain tech, it might be. Do you see that happening as the war progresses?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I'm not sure I see things going in that direction for several reasons. One, I think India needs to be very careful. It would not want it would not want its key Arab partners to know or see that it's actually providing arms to the Israelis. That could be potentially damaging for India's relations with those countries, for sure. And I would also argue that Israel has no shortage of countries such as the United States that are very happy to provide more weapons when the need arises, such as now. And as we've seen, the Biden administration has made quite clear that it's willing to ramp up its military support to Israel. So I think that Israel enjoys an embarrassment of riches in that sense, that it doesn't need to look to some of these middle powers like India when it has the most powerful country in the world that's perfectly happy to provide military support. The U.S., of course, being a top ally of Israel. I think that where India can be useful is in providing, it can be a net provider of other forms of assistance, certainly economic assistance, humanitarian assistance. You look at what India has done in countries like Afghanistan over the years, providing economic aid. But again, Israel can depend on other countries, particularly in the West, including the United States, to serve that role as well.
Right, but will we see a reversal? Looking at it the other way, I think the Israelis are now the third, if not the fourth, biggest exporter of arms to India. Do you think that'll affect the equation? Will the Israelis send less weapons in the coming days as they have to fill their own war chests? Will India's net import of weapons, which is one of the most lucrative weapons contracts in the world. It's a big number. Will we see a differential in the Indian weapons market?
Yeah, it's a great question. I wouldn't want to overstate the immediate term impacts here because you're right. I mean, right now and for however long this war goes, and certainly a few weeks, hopefully not a few months, but it could come to that. Indeed, Israel's not going to be in a position about thinking about renewing shipments of arms to India. Though I would argue that India, like Israel, has that luxury of being able to look to other partners. India, of course, has Russia, as you know, has traditionally been its major arms supplier. That's been changing over the last few years as we've seen the share of weapons coming from the United States and France and Israel, to be sure, going up. But I think India will be okay, even if there's a gap of a few weeks or a few months where it's not getting or it's not expecting arms from Israel. It'll be okay. But I think that perhaps a bigger implication for India, given what Israel is going through now, is tech. Tech transfers. I mean, as you know, it was reported some years ago that Israel provided India with its Pegasus technologies, which basically is surveillance spyware. And I think that now that Israel has experienced this terrible intelligence failure, given what happened with these Hamas attacks, I think Israel is going to be very careful about focusing on ramping up its own intelligence capacities, and it's probably going to be not particularly enthusiastic about moving quickly to share all of this very important surveillance and that type of technology with other countries, including good friends like India. So I think that the tech implications, those are important to highlight here as well.
That's an excellent point. We forget about how much of a intel failure this was, but the Indians seem to be doing a pretty good job at surveilling some members of the press, at the very least, if not their own militants, as we have seen with Israel and Hamas. Real quickly, Mike, bring it home. Bring it to the rest of the South Asia. Bring the conflict to the countries, especially my country. Bring it to Pakistan, where you just were. Do you see a larger net impact somehow affecting, again, through the same optics of the Abraham Accords? Pakistan was expecting a huge inflow of cash from the Saudis and the Emiratis. That doesn't seem to be coming anytime soon, as everybody gets ready and braces for impact of a war which may expand. But bring it home to the other countries as well. The Afghan Taliban have been quite clear that they're not happy with this. The Bangladeshis don't recognize Israel. The Maldivians don't recognize Israel. Bring it home to the larger region and how you see it play out, but hopefully with the emphasis on PAC.
Yeah, there's all kinds of implications for the region, and I'll sort of zoom in, just speaking briefly about the region and then honing in on Pakistan. There at least one country, Nepal, has had nationals killed. I mean, 10 Nepalese students were killed in the Hamas attack, so they were directly impacted. But I would argue that there are a number of broader implications for the region. A number of countries in South Asia, India, but also Pakistan and Bangladesh as well, depend heavily on hydrocarbon imports from the Middle East, and especially if this war becomes a wider one, there could be major energy security implications for these countries. Not to mention that those countries that I mentioned and others in South Asia, they trade more broadly with the Middle East. It's a key trade destination, so that could be impacted as well. And then, of course, you have in the case of Nepal, as well as India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, in particular, you have very large numbers of expatriates, workers that are based in the Arab Gulf. Nepal and India have quite a few nationals in Israel, and I understand that both countries are taking steps to arrange for evacuations of their nationals from Israel. But bringing things back to Pakistan, yeah, for me, the big issue is the normalization, the Israel normalization question. And as you well know, there's been a lot of buzz for several years that Pakistan has been pressured by unnamed countries, but we could easily name them. The U.S., perhaps, Saudi Arabia more recently, if it gets its own normalization deal, maybe the UAE. Pakistan has been feeling some pressure to normalize relations with Israel. And indeed, that I think that this war, in the immediate term, has eliminated any chance that Saudi Arabia would be normalizing relations with Israel. Not to say it won't happen, but it's definitely been put off for now. Obviously, because it can't afford to do something like that, given how Israel has been retaliating and the sheer brutalities of its retaliation for the attacks and so on. For me, I've always felt that Pakistan has a particularly compelling argument for not normalizing Israel. I mean, many countries have resisted because they say they won't do it until there's a Palestinian state, and that certainly is Pakistan's position as well. But what Pakistan does, which I think is rather unique, is that it links the issue of a Palestinian state to the issue of Kashmir. Resolving the status of Kashmir. So, if Pakistan were to recognize Israel in the absence of a Palestinian state, that would equate to essentially abandoning Kashmir. And no Pakistani political figure worth his or her salt, or any Pakistani political figure, could do that. It would essentially, in my view, be political suicide for anyone in Pakistan to recognize Israel without a Palestinian state, given all we've heard about Kashmir being the jugular vein of Pakistan, so on and so forth. So, if you're looking for silver linings about this horrible war that's broken out, silver linings for Pakistan, that is, it's one less thing to worry about. It's not going to be getting a lot of pressure anytime soon for thinking about normalizing ties with Israel.
Brilliantly put, and not just a political figure worth his or her salt, but also a military figure.
Yes.
I know you've got just a couple of minutes, but one last question, considering you were just there, and I wasn't. How are things on the ground? What's your feel? What did you pick up? Tell me about your reading real quickly on in Islamabad, the political mood, the economic mood, the man on the street.
Right. I mean, as you well know, and as many of your audience would know, I mean, Islamabad is generally speaking a fairly placid place. It's fairly low key, and so on surface levels, everything seems fine. But indeed, I had a lot of conversations with political figures in Pakistan, with journalists, with some business leaders as well. And I just honestly, I've been traveling to Pakistan a few times a year, generally every year since 2009. And I can't remember the last time I went when there was just so much nihilism, in the sense that people resigning themselves to the fate that things are going to be rough there for quite some time, mainly because of the economic situation, and just feeling that that's just a bad scene, and that this IMF deal is not necessarily going to magically make things better, and in fact it's induced additional, or sorry, I should say it's created austerity measures that have made things even more difficult for the person on the street, and also a level of uncertainty, particularly about some of the big ticket political issues. The election, is it really going to happen in January? If not, when will it happen? What is the military thinking? Will Nawaz Sharif really return? Will that really have any type of impact on the state of play? A lot of talk as well is about some of these new political parties that have been formed. The King's Party that the army has sponsored, the PTI Rump Party that has been formed. Also talk about the reimagining Pakistan movement, maybe leading to a new party. So just a lot of talk about all these things, but no one really having any answers about where this is all leading. And I think, given how rough the economic situation is, it just seems to be making people feel even more unsettled about where things are in Pakistan today. So, as I said, great food and great conversation, but the politics and the economics of the country are not good. And of course, looming in the background here, well, actually, it's not looming in the background, it's really in Pakistan's face right now, is the resurgence of terror. That continues to be a major concern with the TTP, as well as the concerns about ISK's potential to carry out attacks as well.
Did you talk to any any military officers during your trip about that subject in particular?
I did not. I say that truthfully. I did not speak to anyone. I didn't speak to anyone currently serving in the military. Hopefully, that'll happen on the next trip, whenever that comes.
Mike Kugelman of the South Asia Institute at the Wilson Center. Succinct as always, man. Keep it real, Mike.
Take care.